What's going on, MMA fans? This is LTrain here. Today, I'm going to be talking about a couple upcoming UFC fights that may or may not have an impact on MMA as a sport or the UFC as a company. The two fights I'm talking about, number one, James Toney versus Randy Couture at UFC 118. And then we got Jake Shields versus Martin Kampmann at 121. Talking about the Toney versus Couture fight, Dana White's already come out and called it pretty much a freak show fight, which he says he normally doesn't do. But in my opinion, I think it's a good thing for from a business point of view. He not only gets a lot of viewers because a lot of people know who James Toney is, would love to see him fight MMA, and secondly, he might be able to convert some boxing fans over to MMA by doing this fight. So all in all, it makes good business sense for him to do this. Is it a freak show fight? Yeah, I think so. But all in all, he wouldn't do this fight if it didn't make sense financially for the UFC. So what happens? James Toney wins. I mean, boxing and UFC has been a big rivalry since MMA started. So, what happens if James Toney wins? What happens if Randy Couture wins? I don't really think age is going to be a factor, just because the two, both of the guys, Couture and Toney, are up in age. So, I don't think that'd be a factor at all. I think if Couture wins, which everybody believes he should win, I don't think it's going to have that big of an impact on boxing. But I think it could have a huge impact on MMA if Toney's able to win. So I'm just kind of making this video. I'm more making this video to see how you guys feel about it. Like, what do you think will be the implications if Toney wins? And what do you think will be the implications if Couture wins, if any? There might not. Your opinion might mean that there nothing will happen either way, and that's definitely a possibility. The second fight we're talking about here is Jake Shields versus Martin Kampmann. As many of you guys know, Jake Shields was the former Strikeforce champion and middleweight champion. He came over to the UFC. He dropped down to welterweight, and he's, many consider him one of the best in the world. And he's fighting a tough, gritty fighter in Martin Kampmann, who is coming off of a big win against Paulo Thiago. So let's just put it out like this. Everybody knows that it was a mistake for Strikeforce not to sign him going into a title fight. I think they put all their eggs in one basket. They thought that Henderson would be able to beat him, and when he didn't, I can't say this for sure, but I honestly think that the brawl was arranged by Strikeforce in some manner or another. That will never come out, but that's just my opinion. I think they sent Miller into the ring to try to somehow spark something between the two of them and get Shields to come back, maybe to give himself an upper hand when it comes to negotiating. That's just my opinion. Who knows if that's the case or not. I mean, we'll never know, I don't believe. But so, what happens if Shields comes over to the UFC and does well? Can Strikeforce say that they belong, or that they have some of the best in the world, and that they kind of belong at that top tier with the UFC, even though that they're not really close? But can they say, well, we got good fighters as well? We're not just putting on a lot of UFC has-beens and UFC rejects. We're not putting on we don't have them kind of people here. We actually have some good fighters, and they can make that point with with a good showing by Shields. I mean, if he comes in, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but if he comes in and beats GSP, I mean, that could give him a lot of credit over there at Strikeforce. If Kampmann wins, on the other hand, what does that say about Strikeforce? It could just mean, I mean, it could really bump up UFC status, I think, if Kampmann comes in and wins, as they claim that they have the best fighters in the world, and that would definitely lay cement to their claim. So I guess I'm asking you, what do you think would happen if Kampmann wins? What do you think would happen if Shields wins? As you're looking at the two organizations, Strikeforce and UFC, will Shields win bump up the credit for Strikeforce? Will Kampmann win bump up credit for UFC? One of the top MMA sites that I go to is MMAmafia.net. If you guys are looking for a great site, that's a great site to go to. I posed this question to some people in the forums there. The administrator, Crackerjack, he thinks that it's just going to prove a point for the UFC that they have the best in the world, and it's really not going to have any effect on Strikeforce. Let me go ahead and look at the comment, and then I'll tell you exactly what the comment says. Crackerjack says if Shields wins, if Shield sucks in the fight, that it's going to prove that the UFC has the best in the world, and that it's all negative for Strikeforce. If he loses, it will show that the UFC has a much stronger division, and if he wins, that they lost their best fighter at that weight and picked up a UFC dropout in return, which is very true. So I guess I want to know, what do you guys think would happen with those two situations? I don't personally think it's going to have a huge impact on boxing if Toney loses. I think a lot of people believe that Toney will lose. I am kind of going out on a limb. I don't really think this would happen, but I think it would be hilarious if Couture makes Toney tap out the strikes, because as a boxer, we know that boxers can take a lot of punishment. But what happens if you're on the ground and you're taking punishment and you know that there's nothing you could do about it? That's a completely different situation. Toney could get frustrated. He may tap out to strikes. I highly doubt it that he does. I think he'll, if anything, that Couture could win by TKO. If it does happen, I believe it will be the ref by a ref stoppage. A lot of people think that Couture will submit him. Of course, with that fight, as everybody knows, Toney always has a possibility of knocking out Couture. If he lands one good punch, it could be lights out. I think you're dealing with a different kind of power when it comes to boxers, especially a boxer at Toney's caliber. Shields, on the other hand, has looked great. He's fought some good fighters. I believe he's going to be really good in the UFC. But Kampmann's no slouch. It's gonna be a big hit to Shields if he comes in and loses to Kampmann right off the bat. So just leave your comments. I just want to know what you think. What happens if Toney wins, boxing wins over mixed martial arts, or what happens if Couture wins? So what happens to each other's sport? Does it tarnish anything from each other's sport with this first, boxing versus MMA? And the second thing, Shields versus Kampmann, what happens between Strikeforce and UFC when that fight happens? So just let me know. Thanks again.